The envelope slid across the marble table without ceremony, pushed by a man who had already decided I was finished. The sound it made was soft, almost polite, but in the quiet of the glass-walled restaurant, it landed like a verdict. Outside, snow pressed itself against the windows of the Highcrest Summit Club, blurring the city lights below into something distant and unreal. My husband, Daniel, didn't look at me when he said it. "Sign it," he murmured, adjusting the cuff of his tailored coat. "Let's not drag this out." Across from him, his mother exhaled slowly, the way people do when they're pretending to be reasonable. His father stared into his whiskey as if the outcome had already been calculated and approved. I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I looked at the place settings. Imported stoneware. Linen napkins folded by hand. Crystal glasses catching the amber glow from the low chandeliers. This room was reserved for donors and legacy members, people who believed money should never announce itself, only be recognized. I didn't belong here. At least, that's what they'd spent years reminding me. "You know," Daniel's father said at last, his voice smooth with practiced disappointment, "we tried to make this work. We really did. But there's a mismatch. A difference in worlds." His eyes dropped to my hands resting on the table. The scars were old. Faded lines crossing my knuckles, a faint burn along my thumb. The kind you get from handling machinery, from fixing things instead of managing them. "This environment," his mother added gently, "requires a certain polish." Daniel finally looked at me then. Not with anger. Worse, detachment. "You've always taken it personally," he said. "But this was inevitable. You're functional. Practical. And that's fine. Just not here. Not with us." I felt something settle in my chest. Not pain. Not shock. Focus. The same calm that used to come over me before I shut down a system, isolated a fault, and rewired it from the inside out. The server arrived quietly and placed the bill between us. I glanced at the total. $21,760. A curated parade of bottles I hadn't ordered. Dishes I hadn't touched. A private room surcharge for the privilege of being dismissed in luxury. Daniel let out a short laugh. "Guess that's yours. We're separated now, technically. Wouldn't be right for me to cover it." His mother smiled into her napkin. "Oh, darling. I'm sure she'll manage. People like her always do. People like her." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Daniel's eyes followed the movement, bored, confident. He was expecting a card. Maybe cash. Maybe hesitation. What I placed on the table was neither. It was a slim, dark object, heavier than it looked. Matte black, no numbers, no logo. The edge was brushed metal, unassuming, precise. It didn't clatter when it touched the table. It settled. The server froze. He stared at the card. Then at me. His face lost color. I can't process this here," he said quietly, thumb hovering over the terminal. Daniel sighed. "Just swipe it." The server didn't move. He touched his earpiece instead. "Yes," he said. "I need management. Immediately." Daniel's father straightened. "What is this nonsense?" "You don't need to call them," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Steady. They already know." The doors at the far end of the room opened. The general manager entered without haste, flanked by 2 members of security. He ignored Daniel completely. Walked past his parents. Stopped in front of me. And inclined his head. Not a nod. A bow. "Ms. Calder," he said clearly. "We weren't informed you'd be joining us tonight." Daniel blinked. "You've made a mistake. Her name is irrelevant," the manager replied, finally turning his attention to my husband. His tone was flat. Final. That card grants full authorization over this establishment and its associated properties. Silence collapsed inward. You're mistaken, Daniel said, standing abruptly. That's impossible. The manager's gaze hardened. Sir, you are dining at the discretion of its owner. I leaned back in my chair. I think we're done here, I said. The server's hand shook as he took the card. Run it, I told him. To understand what happened next, you have to understand something Daniel never did. He thought control came from presentation. From titles. From proximity to people who looked important. I built systems. Quietly. Methodically. I learned how leverage works, not in theory, but in practice. Long before I married him, I had been taught one rule. Never reveal your strongest position until the pressure is unbearable. Daniel believed he was discarding a liability. He didn't realize he was attempting to evict the foundation. And as the room held its breath, I understood something else just as clearly. This wasn't the end. This was ignition. The room didn't explode the way Daniel probably expected. No shouting. No scrambling apologies. Just a quiet, suffocating shift in gravity. The kind you feel when a plane loses altitude without warning and your stomach lags behind reality. Daniel remained standing, hands braced on the edge of the table, staring at the black card as if it might suddenly explain itself. His parents hadn't moved at all. His mother's smile had hardened into something brittle, her lips pressed together so tightly they lost their color. His father's whiskey sat untouched, the ice slowly melting, ignored for the first time all evening. This is some kind of stunt, Daniel said finally. You've always liked theatrics. I didn't answer him. I watched the server swipe the card with the care of someone handling a loaded weapon. The terminal chirped softly. Approved. No receipt. No signature. The kind of transaction that didn't need confirmation because it had already been decided long before it happened. The server exhaled and stepped back, eyes fixed on the floor. Enjoy the rest of your evening, the manager said, turning to Daniel and his parents. It wasn't a suggestion. Daniel laughed once, sharp and forced. You expect us to believe she owns this place? She barely knows how to hold a wine glass. That did it. His mother stood abruptly, chair legs screeching against stone. Enough, she snapped, pointing at me. Whatever game you're playing, it's in extremely poor taste. You sat at our table for years letting us think. Think what? I asked. She faltered, just for a second. That you were, struggling, she finished. I tilted my head. I never said that. You didn't correct us. You never asked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The silence stretched. Daniel's father cleared his throat, stepping in with the air of a man used to negotiating his way out of consequences. Let's be rational, he said. If you do, in fact, have some stake here, we can discuss terms. Daniel is still your husband. There are laws. There are, I agreed. Daniel's eyes lit up at that. Exactly. You don't get to pull rank and pretend this erases everything. Half of what you have is mine. For the first time that night, I smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. With recognition. You're assuming I acquired it during the marriage, I said. That's an expensive mistake. The manager stepped forward again. Ms. Calder's holdings predate her relationship with Mr. Hale by several years, he said. They are structured through private trusts. None of which include your son. Daniel's confidence faltered, but only briefly. He had always been good at denial. It was how he survived bad investments and worse decisions. You're lying, he said. She doesn't have the background. The education. The pedigree? I finished for him. He didn't deny it. I stood then, slowly, letting the chair slide back without noise. I felt taller standing, steadier, like a machine brought fully online. You spent years embarrassed by what I do, I said quietly. You introduced me as between projects. You joked about my hands. You asked me not to talk too much around your friends. Daniel flinched. Just barely. I thought if I stayed quiet, I continued, if I didn't correct you, if I didn't remind you who I was outside of you, it would make things easier. I thought love meant compromise. His father scoffed. Don't be dramatic. I'm not, I said. I'm being precise. I turned to the manager. I'm leaving. He nodded immediately. Your suite is prepared. Daniel stepped into my path. You don't get to walk away, he said, his voice low. Not after this. I met his eyes. I've been walking away for years, I said. Tonight, I just stopped pretending. Security moved without being asked, positioning themselves subtly between us. Daniel noticed. His parents did too. This isn't over, his mother said, her voice shaking now. We'll make sure everyone knows what you did. I paused at the door and looked back at them. You still think reputation is something you control, I said. That's going to hurt you. The doors closed behind me, sealing in the warmth, the wine, the illusion. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. The kind that clears your lungs and your head at the same time. I stood there for a moment, breathing, letting the night reset my pulse. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Because humiliation is only the first response when people realize they've been standing on borrowed ground. The next response is retaliation. And Daniel had always been predictable under pressure. As I stepped into the waiting car, my phone buzzed. A message from my attorney. We need to talk. Immediately. I looked back once at the glowing windows of the club, at the figures still trapped inside their certainty. I knew then that what they'd tried to make a public execution was about to become something much worse. A reckoning they couldn't buy their way out of. The drive down the mountain was silent except for the rhythmic sweep of the headlights across the snowbanks. I watched the road unwind beneath us, sharp turns softened by fresh powder, and felt the delayed tremor of what had just happened finally reach my hands. Not fear. Not doubt. Recognition. The kind that settles in when you realize the line you crossed was never meant to be uncrossed again. My phone buzzed again before we reached the city limits. Daniel. I didn't answer. Then his mother. Then a number I didn't recognize, followed by a voicemail notification. I turned the phone face down. By the time the car pulled into the underground garage of my building, the calm had returned. The same mental clarity I used when dismantling something complex piece by piece. You don't rush. You don't react emotionally. You isolate the components and remove them in the correct order. Upstairs, my apartment was dark and quiet, exactly how I'd left it that morning. I set my jacket on the chair, washed my hands slowly, scrubbing away the faint smell of metal and cold air. When I finally picked up my phone again, there were 14 missed calls. One message from my attorney sat unread at the top. Daniel filed an emergency motion tonight. Of course he did. I called her immediately. He's claiming concealment, she said without preamble. Accusing you of deliberately hiding assets during the marriage to manipulate the settlement. I smiled faintly. That didn't take long. He's also requesting a temporary injunction, she continued. He wants to freeze your accounts pending review. That won't hold. No, she agreed. But it tells me how desperate he is. Desperation makes people sloppy. Daniel had always been dangerous only when he believed he was untouchable. Cornered, he defaulted to arrogance and threats. Predictable patterns were easy to dismantle. What else? I asked. She hesitated. There's more. His legal team submitted documentation claiming joint authorship over some of your work. That stopped me. What documentation? A licensing agreement, she said. Filed digitally. Dated 6 months ago. It assigns partial ownership of your designs to an LLC under his control. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with a familiar, burning anger. I never signed anything like that. I know, she said. The metadata doesn't match your activity logs. But he's betting you won't notice until it's too late. I closed my eyes. Daniel hadn't just tried to leave me publicly humiliated. He was trying to rewrite reality. To take the one thing that had always existed independently of him and turn it into leverage. He forged it, I said flatly. Yes, she replied. And that changes everything. Forgery wasn't a negotiation tactic. It was a felony. I spent the rest of the night awake, not pacing, not spiraling. Planning. By morning, my legal team had assembled a timeline that dismantled Daniel's claim down to the minute. Where I was. Who I was with. Surveillance footage. Receipts. Witnesses. Truth, when documented properly, is merciless. 3 days later, we met in mediation. Daniel looked smaller. Not physically. He still wore the same expensive suit, the same curated confidence. But there was a tightness to him now, a brittleness under the surface. His father sat rigid beside him, jaw clenched, eyes darting. His mother avoided looking at me entirely. Daniel's lawyer opened with accusations. Bad faith. Deception. Emotional manipulation. I let them speak. Then my attorney slid a folder across the table. This document, she said calmly, contains a forensic analysis of the licensing agreement Mr. Hale submitted. It concludes the signature was digitally replicated. Not executed. Daniel stiffened. We are also submitting evidence, she continued, that at the time of signing, my client was in another state, confirmed by flight records, geolocation data, and third-party witnesses. Silence spread. This constitutes forgery, she said. And attempted fraud. Daniel's lawyer's face drained of color. That's absurd, Daniel snapped. She's twisting this. No, my attorney said. You did. Daniel turned to me, eyes wide now, pleading disguised as fury. You're really going to do this? I didn't forge my name, I replied. The mediator cleared his throat. Given this information, the court will likely. There's more, my attorney interrupted. She placed another document on the table. A loan agreement. Daniel's father leaned forward. What is that? A personal line of credit, my attorney said, secured against intellectual property Mr. Hale did not own. Daniel's breath hitched. You leveraged her work, she said. To cover losses. No one spoke. The room felt suddenly too small. You committed fraud, my attorney concluded. And you exposed my client to liability without her consent. We are filing criminal charges. Daniel stood abruptly. You can't. I can, I said softly. And I am. That was the moment he broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He sagged back into his chair, hands shaking, eyes unfocused. The mask finally slipped, revealing what had always been there beneath the entitlement. Fear. The mediation ended shortly after. No agreement. No compromise. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in years. Daniel called after me, his voice cracking. Please. We can fix this. I didn't turn around. Some things aren't broken. They're revealed. And once revealed, they can't be unseen. The first headline appeared the next morning, buried halfway down a business news feed Daniel used to read religiously. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Tech founder under investigation following asset misrepresentation allegations. No names in the title. Just enough specificity to make people click. Inside, the article was careful, almost polite. Words like alleged, pending review, sources familiar with the matter. It mentioned an unnamed founder. A private lending firm. Intellectual property disputes. Anyone who mattered knew exactly who it was about. Daniel called me 12 times before noon. I didn't answer. By mid-afternoon, his investors started calling each other. Not him. Each other. That was the real shift. When people stop calling you directly, it's because they're already planning around your absence. My attorney forwarded me emails as they came in. Requests for comment. Requests for clarification. Requests phrased as favors from people who had once pretended Daniel was indispensable. He wasn't. He was useful. There's a difference. The district attorney filed charges 2 days later. Forgery. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Each one precise, boring, devastating. The kind of words that don't trend on social media but ruin lives quietly, permanently. Daniel showed up at my door that night. I hadn't expected that. Not because I thought he had dignity left, but because I assumed his pride would keep him away longer. He looked terrible. The suit was gone. Replaced by something rumpled, hastily chosen. His hair was unstyled, his face hollowed out by a panic he couldn't control. He knocked twice, then again, harder, like persistence might override security. I didn't open the door. I spoke through it. You shouldn't be here. I just need to talk, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Please. Silence stretched between us. Go home, Daniel. I don't have one anymore. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Your lawyer told me you're freezing everything, he said. My accounts. My access. You're cutting me off. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. You're destroying me. I rested my forehead briefly against the door, not out of weakness, but out of clarity. He still thought this was about punishment. You did that, I said. I just stopped absorbing the damage. He slid down the door on the other side. I could hear it. The quiet thud as his back hit the wood. They're all gone, he said. Everyone. My dad's partners. The board. The firm I was talking to, they pulled out this morning. I said nothing. I thought you were simple, he admitted. I thought I was the smart one. There it was. The truth always leaks out when the scaffolding collapses. You didn't think I was simple, I said. You thought I was safe to underestimate. He started crying then. Not elegantly. Not silently. It was messy and undignified, the sound of someone realizing too late that the story they told themselves was a lie. I loved you, he said. I closed my eyes. No, I replied. You loved how small I let you feel powerful. The crying stopped. Open the door, he whispered. I didn't. You can't fix this, I continued. Not with apologies. Not with nostalgia. Not with fear. What do you want from me, he asked. I paused, considering the question honestly. I want you to live with the consequences of your choices, I said. The same way I did. Footsteps approached in the hallway. Security doing a routine sweep. Daniel heard them too. Please, he said one last time. I didn't answer. The footsteps passed. After a long moment, his breathing steadied. Then his weight shifted away from the door. I listened as he walked down the hall, slower than he'd arrived. The next week unfolded like a controlled demolition. His father's company was audited. Not raided. Audited. A slow, methodical process that doesn't announce itself until it's too late to stop. Lines of credit tightened. Contracts reviewed. Favors called in and quietly denied. His mother stopped attending events. Her social calendar went dark. Invitations dried up. People who once kissed her cheek now smiled politely from across rooms and kept their distance. Daniel's name vanished from panels, from conferences, from introductions. It wasn't that people spoke badly of him. They stopped speaking of him at all. That's the real erasure. I finalized the divorce without contest. No alimony. No settlement. Just a clean severing, executed with surgical efficiency. The judge barely looked at Daniel when he signed the order. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Not for him. For me. I ignored them. 6 weeks later, I stood in my studio, sunlight cutting through the high windows, illuminating half-finished structures waiting patiently for my hands. I worked slowly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of creation reset something deep inside me. Destruction is loud. Rebuilding is quiet. My phone buzzed once more. A single message from an unknown number. I see now. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I deleted it without responding. Some lessons don't require acknowledgement. They require distance. Time didn't rush in to fill the space Daniel left behind. It expanded slowly, deliberately, like a room finally allowed to breathe after years of being overcrowded. The noise faded first. The constant alerts. The legal updates. The whispers moving through circles that had once treated his name like currency. Silence replaced it, and unlike before, this silence felt earned. I didn't celebrate. That surprised people. They expected champagne photos, dramatic statements, victory laps dressed as empowerment. Instead, I disappeared from public view entirely. No interviews. No carefully worded posts. I let the story burn itself out without feeding it oxygen. Scandals die faster when they aren't watched. Daniel didn't understand that. He mistook absence for mercy. 2 weeks after the charges became public, his attorney reached out through mine. Not with demands. Not with threats. With an offer. They wanted to settle. Not the divorce, that was already finalized. This was about something else. The forged licensing agreement. The debt he'd tried to pin to my work. The criminal case that now sat in the system like a weight on his future. He was offering cooperation. Testimony. Anything. In exchange, he wanted leniency. My attorney laid out the terms on my kitchen counter, papers arranged neatly, unemotional. If you agree to a civil settlement, she said, the prosecution may consider reduced sentencing recommendations. Not immunity. Just less. I studied the documents. Daniel's handwriting appeared on one of the margins, shaky and uneven, a man trying to sound composed while unraveling. What do you want to do? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the nights I'd stayed awake recalculating my worth based on his moods. The way I'd learned to shrink conversations, to make my successes sound accidental so he wouldn't feel threatened. The way his parents had smiled while treating me like a tolerated inconvenience. I thought about the work. My work. The hours of physical exhaustion. The pride I'd taken in building something that didn't need applause to exist. No deal, I said finally. She nodded. No surprise. I thought you might say that. Daniel didn't take the news well. He showed up again. Not at my home this time. At my studio. He must have followed someone. Or guessed. Desperation sharpens instincts. I was in the middle of a piece when the door opened behind me. The sound was wrong. Too abrupt. I turned slowly, welding mask still in my hand. He froze when he saw me. Not because I looked intimidating. Because I didn't look like the version of me he remembered. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was grounded. Occupied. Whole. This place, he said, looking around, voice echoing slightly. I never really saw it before. That was intentional, I replied. I'm not here to fight, he said quickly. I just needed to understand. I set my tools down carefully. Took off my gloves. You want closure, I said. That's not my responsibility. They're coming for everything, he said. My dad's company. My accounts. My future. I made mistakes, but you thought they wouldn't apply to you, I finished. He flinched. I didn't know how bad it was, he whispered. I didn't think you'd fight back like this. That almost made me smile. You never thought I was capable of resistance, I said. That was your mistake. He stepped closer. You could still stop this. I met his gaze steadily. No. I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't. His voice broke. I loved you. I shook my head. You loved the version of me that made your life easier. Silence stretched between us, heavy but no longer threatening. What happens to me now? He asked. I considered the question, not unkindly. You face what you tried to avoid, I said. Responsibility. He left shortly after that. No dramatic exit. No final accusation. Just a man walking out of a space he'd never bothered to understand. The trial moved forward without spectacle. Evidence stacked neatly. Timelines aligned. Experts testified. Daniel pled not guilty at first, then quietly changed his plea when reality set in. The sentence came months later. Not ruinous. Not theatrical. Final. Probation. Financial restitution. Permanent damage to credibility. The kind of outcome that doesn't make headlines but changes the trajectory of a life. I watched none of it. Instead, I focused on expansion. Not in the way Daniel would have understood. Not scaling for attention. Scaling for sustainability. I hired quietly. Built deliberately. Redirected resources toward projects that aligned with my values, not optics. People noticed eventually. They always do. Invitations returned. Different ones. From people who spoke less and listened more. From institutions that valued substance over shine. I accepted some. Declined others. I no longer needed proximity to power. I had my own. One evening, months later, I received a handwritten letter forwarded by my attorney. Daniel's handwriting again. Cleaner this time. Slower. He wrote about regret. About therapy. About learning humility. I read it once. Then I filed it away with the rest of the past. Not out of bitterness. Out of completion. Because closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from forward motion. The last paperwork arrived without ceremony. No envelope stamped urgent. No calls demanding attention. Just a thin folder delivered by courier and left on the front desk of my studio, like a period at the end of a sentence that had already been spoken. I didn't open it right away. I finished what I was working on first. The piece had taken months. Reclaimed steel, volcanic glass, and a frame designed to look almost fragile until you understood how the internal load was distributed. From the outside, it appeared unbalanced. From the inside, it was nearly indestructible. I'd built it that way on purpose. When I finally sat down and opened the folder, the contents were exactly what I expected. Final judgments. Closed accounts. Certifications confirming ownership, separation, and liability. Daniel's name appeared only where it had to, stripped of titles, reduced to legal necessity. There was no satisfaction in it. That surprised me more than anything. I thought there would be a moment where the weight of it all lifted at once. A rush. A release. Instead, there was only quiet acceptance. Like finishing a long, difficult job and realizing you're not exhausted anymore, you're just done. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the city move without noticing me. People heading somewhere. People late for something. People still believing that proximity to noise equals importance. Months earlier, I would have wondered what Daniel was doing at that exact moment. Whether he was thinking about me. Whether he regretted things in the way people promise themselves regret will look like. I didn't wonder now. Because I finally understood something I hadn't before: closure isn't mutual. It doesn't require agreement or acknowledgement. It only requires you to stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. The foundation launched quietly the following week. No press release. No branding campaign. Just funding, applications, and an open door. Tradespeople. Artists. Fabricators. People who worked with their hands and had been told, at one point or another, that they were replaceable. That they were background labor. That they should be grateful just to be allowed in the room. Watching them walk into that space for the first time reminded me of myself years ago. Careful posture. Guarded optimism. The instinct to minimize their presence so no one could accuse them of taking too much. I made it a rule early on, no one had to shrink to belong here. Daniel called once more. A single ring. Blocked number. Late at night. I let it go to voicemail without hesitation. Whatever he needed to say wasn't for me anymore. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped framing my life as a response to what had been done to me. I wasn't rebuilding out of spite or proving anything to anyone. I was simply constructing something better because I could. And because I wanted to. That's the part people get wrong about strength. They think it's loud. Defensive. Always in motion. But real strength settles. It roots itself. It doesn't look back unless there's something worth carrying forward. I still have the scars on my hands. I always will. They don't embarrass me anymore. They remind me that what I build lasts longer than what people say about me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly erased, know this: your value isn't decided in rooms that don't understand your work. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is keep building, long after the noise fades. I'll see you in the next story.